Everyone loves to listen to a good book, and there are so many wonderful ones to choose, so we decided to bring you this podcast of Stories Come to Life. Each episode features a story from either classic or modern literature, especially chosen to be interesting and exciting to hear. So sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Welcome to Stories Come to Life. This is episode 20, book 2, and I am your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. This is a Christmas unlike Maida has ever experienced. She opens her shop to Rosie, Dicky, and Arthur for their handicraft fair, and she finds the perfect gifts for her father, Billy, and of course the members of the WMNT. But Granny's gift from Billy is the best gift of all. Now sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Maida's Little Shop, Chapter 13. The Fair. Save your pennies! A Christmas fair will be held in this shop the Saturday before Christmas. Delicious candies made by Miss Rosie Brine. Paper goods designed and executed by Master Richard Dorr. Wood carving designed and executed by Master Arthur Duncan. Don't miss it. This sign hung in Maida's window for a week. Billy made it. The lettering was red and gold. In one corner, he painted a picture of a little boy and girl in their nightgowns, peeking up a chimney place hung with stockings. In the other corner, the full moon face of a Santa Claus popped like a jolly jack-in-the-box from a chimney top. A troop of reindeer, dragging a sleigh full of toys, scurried through the printing. The whole thing was enclosed in a wreath of holly. The sign attracted a great deal of attention. Children were always stopping to admire it, and even grown people paused now and then. There was such a falling off of Maida's trade that she guessed that the children were really saving their pennies for the fair. This delighted her. The WMNTs wasted no time that last week, in spite of a very enticing snowstorm. Maida, of course, had nothing to do on her own account, but she worked with Dicky morning and afternoon. Rosie could not make candy until the last 2 or 3 days for fear it would get stale. Then she set to like a whirlwind. "My face is almost tanned from bending over the stove," she said to Maida. "Aunt Teresa says if I cook another batch of candy, I'll have a crop of freckles." Arthur seemed to work the hardest of all because his work was so much more difficult. It took a great deal of time and strength, and yet nobody could help him in it. The sound of his hammering came into Maida's room early in the morning. It came in sometimes late at night when, cuddling between her blankets, she thought what a happy girl she was. "I niver saw such fine, busy little folks," Granny said approvingly again and again. "It minds me of me own Annie. Niver a moment but that lass was working at something. Oh, I wonder what she's doing and thinking this Christmas." "Don't you worry," Maida always said. "Billy'll find her for you yet. He said he would." Maida herself was giving for the first time in her experience a good deal of thought to Christmas time. In the first place, she had sent the following invitation to every child in Primrose Court. "Will you please come to my Christmas tree to be given Christmas night in the little shop? Maida." In the second place, she was spying on all her friends, listening to their talk, watching them closely in work and play to find just the right thing to give them. "Do you know, I never made a Christmas present in my life," she said one day to Rosie. "You never made a Christmas present?" Rosie repeated. Maida's quick perception sensed in Rosie's face an unspoken accusation of selfishness. "It wasn't because I didn't want to, Rosie dear," Maida hastened to explain. "It was because I was too sick. You see, I was always in bed. I was too weak to make anything, and I could not go out and buy presents as other children did. But people used to give me the loveliest things." "What did they give you?" Rosie asked curiously. "Oh, all kinds of things. Father's given me an automobile and a pair of Shetland ponies and a family of 20 dolls and my weight in silver dollars. I can't remember half the things I've had." "A pair of Shetland ponies, an automobile, a family of 20 dolls, your weight in silver dollars?" Rosie repeated after her. "Why, Maida, you're dreaming or you're out of your head." Out of my head? Why, Rosie, you're out of your head. Don't you suppose I know what I got for Christmas? Maida's eyes began to flash and her lips to tremble. Well now, Maida, just think of it, Rosie said in her most reasonable voice. Here you are, a little girl just like anybody else, only you're running a shop. Now, just as if you could afford to have an automobile. Why, my father knows a man who knows another man who bought an automobile and it cost $900. What did yours cost? $2,000? Maida said this with a guilty air, in spite of her knowledge of the truth. Rosie smiled roguishly. Maida, dear, she coaxed, you dreamed it. Maida started to her feet. For a moment she came near to saying something very saucy indeed, but she remembered in time. Of course, nobody in the neighborhood knew that she was Buffalo Westerbrook's daughter. It was impossible for her to prove any of her statements. The flash died out of her eyes, but another flash came into her cheeks, the flash of dimples. Well, perhaps I did dream it, Rosie, she said archly, but I don't think I did, she added in a quiet tone. Rosie turned the subject tactfully. What are you going to give your father? She asked. That's bothering me dreadfully, Maida sighed. I can't think of anything he needs. Why don't you buy him the same thing I'm going to get my papa? Rosie suggested eagerly. That is, I'm going to buy it if I make enough money at the fair. Does your father shave himself? Oh, Adolphe, his valet, always shaves him, Maida answered. Rosie's brow knit over the word valet, but Maida was always puzzling the neighborhood with strange expressions. Then her brow lightened. My father goes to a barber too, she said. I've heard him complaining lots of times how expensive it is. And the other day, Arthur told me about a razor his father uses. He says it's just like a lawnmower or a carpet sweeper. You don't have to have anybody shave you if you have one of them. You run it right over your face and it takes all the beard off and doesn't cut or anything. Now, wouldn't you think that would be fun? I should think it would be just lovely, Maida agreed. That's just the thing for Papa, for he is so busy. How much does it cost, Rosie? About $1, Arthur thought. I never paid so much for a Christmas present in my life, and I'm not sure yet that I can get one. But if I do sell $2 worth of candy, I can buy something perfectly beautiful for Father and Mother. Oh, Rosie, Maida asked breathlessly, do you mean that your mother's come back? Rosie's face changed. Don't you think I'd tell you the very first thing? No, she hasn't come back, and they don't say anything about her coming back. But if she ever does come, I guess I'm going to have her Christmas present all ready for her. Maida patted her hand. She's coming back, she said. I know it. Rosie sighed. You come down Main Street the night before Christmas. Dicky and I are going to buy our Christmas presents then, and we can show you where to get the little razor. I'd love to, Maida beamed. And indeed, it seemed the most fascinating prospect in the world to her. Every night after she went to bed, she thought it over. She was really going to buy Christmas presents without any grown-up person about to interfere. It was rapture. The night before the fair, the children worked even harder than the night before Halloween, for there were so many things to display. It was evident that the stock would overflow windows and shelves and showcases. We'll bring the long kitchen table in for your things, Arthur, Maida decided after a perplexed consideration of the subject. Dicky's and Rosie's things ought to go on the shelves and into the showcases where nobody can handle them. They tugged the table into the shop and covered it with a beautiful old blue counterpane. That's fine, Arthur approved, unpacking his handicraft from the bushel baskets in which he brought them. The others stood around, admiring the treasures and helping him to arrange them prettily. A fleet of graceful little boats occupied one end of the table, piles of breadboards, rolling pins, and cats the other. In the center lay a bowl filled with tiny baskets, carved from peach stones. From the molding hung a fringe of hockey sticks. Having arranged all Arthur's things, the quartet filed upstairs to the closet, where Dicky's paperwork was kept. Gracious, I didn't realize there were so many, Rosie said. Sure, the lad has worked night and day, Granny said, patting Dicky's thin cheek. They filled Arthur's baskets and trooped back to the shop. They lined showcase and shelves with the glittering things, boxes big and little, gorgeously ornamented with stars and moons, caps of gold and silver, flying gay plumes, rainbow boats too beautiful to sail on anything but fairy seas, miniature jackets and trousers, that only a circus rider would wear. "Dicky, I never did see anything so lovely," Maida said, shaking her hands with delight. "I really didn't realize how pretty they were." Dicky's big eyes glowed with satisfaction. "Nor me neither," he confessed. "And now," Maida said, bubbling over with suppressed importance, "Rosie's candies. I've saved that until the last." She pulled out one of the drawers under the showcase and lifted it on the counter. It was filled with candy boxes of paper, prettily decorated with flower patterns on the outside, with fringes of lace paper on the inside. "I ordered these boxes for you, Rosie," she explained. "I knew your candy would sell better if it was put up nicely. I thought the little ones could be 5-cent size, the middle-sized ones 10-cent size, and the big ones 25-cent size." Rosie was dancing up and down with delight. "They're just lovely, Maida, and how sweet you were to think of it. But it was just like you." "Now we must pack them," Maida said. 4 pairs of hands made light work of this. By 9 o'clock, all the boxes were filled and spread out temptingly in the showcase. By 9:15, 3 of the WMNTs were in bed, trying hard to get to sleep. But Maida stayed up. The boxes were not her only surprise. After the others had gone, she and Granny worked for half an hour in the little shop. The Saturday before Christmas dawned clear and fair. Rosie hallooed for Dicky and Arthur as she came out of doors at 7:30, and all 3 arrived at the shop together. Their faces took on such a comic look of surprise that Maida burst out laughing. "But where did it all come from?" Rosie asked in bewilderment. "Maida, you sly boots, you must have done this after we all left." Maida nodded, but all Arthur and Dicky said was, "Gee," and "Jiminy crickets." But Maida found these exclamatives quite as expressive as Rosie's hugs, and indeed she herself thought the place worthy of any degree of admiring enthusiasm. The shop was so strung with garlands of Christmas green that it looked like a bower. Bunches of mistletoe and holly added their colors to the holiday cheer. Red Christmas bells hung everywhere. "My goodness, I never passed such a day in my life," Maida said that night at dinner. She was telling it all to Granny, who had been away on a mysterious business of her own. "It's been like a beehive here ever since 8 o'clock this morning. If we'd each of us had an extra pair of hands at our knees and another at our waists, perhaps we could have begun to wait on all the people." "Sure 'twas no more than you deserved for being such busy little bees," Granny approved. "The only trouble was," Maida went on smilingly, "that they liked everything so much that they could not decide which they wanted most. Of course, the boys preferred Arthur's carvings and the girls Rosie's candy, but it was hard to say who liked Dicky's things the best." Granny twinkled with delight. She had never told Maida, but she did not need to tell her, that Dicky was her favorite. "And then the grown people who came. Granny, first Arthur's father on his way to work, then Mrs. Lathrop and Laura. They bought loads of things, and Mrs. Clark and Mrs. Doyle and even Mr. Flanagan bought a hockey stick. He said," Maida dimpled with delight, "he said he bought it to use on Arthur and Rosie if they ever hooked Jack again. Poor Miss Allison bought one of Arthur's cats. What do you suppose for?" Granny had no idea. "To wind her wool on. Then Billy came at the last minute and bought everything that was left. And just think, Granny, there was a crowd of little boys and girls who had stood about watching all day without any money to spend, and Billy divided among them all the things he bought. Guess how much money they made." Granny guessed 3 sums, and each time Maida said triumphantly, "More." At last, Granny had to give it up. Arthur made $5.30. Dicky made $3.82, and Rosie made $2.70. After dinner that night, Maida accompanied Rosie and Dicky on the Christmas shopping expedition. They went first to a big dry goods store with Dicky. They helped Dicky to pick out a fur collar for his mother from a counter marked conspicuously $2.98. The one they selected was of gray and brown fur. It was Maida's opinion that it was sable and chinchilla mixed. Dicky's face shone with delight when at last he tucked the big round box safely under his arm. "Just think, I've been planning to do this for 3 years," he said, "and I never could have done it now if it hadn't have been for you, Maida." Next, Dicky took the 2 little girls where they could buy razors. "The kind that goes like a lawnmower," Rosie explained to the proprietor. The man stared hard before he showed them his stock, but he was very kind and explained to them exactly how the little machine worked. Maida noticed that Rosie examined very carefully all the things displayed in the windows and on the counters, but nothing she saw seemed to satisfy her, for she did not buy. "What is it, Rosie?" Maida asked after a while. "I'm looking for something for my mother." "I'll help you," Maida said. She took Rosie's hand, and thus linked together, the two little girls discussed everything they saw. Suddenly, Rosie uttered a little cry of joy and stopped at a jeweler's window. A tray with the label "Solid Silver, $1," overflowed with little heart-shaped pendants. "Mama would love one of those," Rosie said. She just loved things she could hang around her neck. They went inside. "It's just what I want," Rosie declared. "But I wish I had a little chain for it, a little silver one. I can't afford one, though," she concluded wistfully. "Oh, I know what to do," Maida said. "Buy a piece of narrow black velvet ribbon. Once my father gave my mother a beautiful diamond heart. Mother used to wear it on a black velvet ribbon. Afterward, Papa bought her a chain of diamonds, but she always liked the black velvet best, and so did Papa, and so did I." The other three children looked curiously at Maida when she said diamond heart. When she said string of diamonds, they looked at each other. "Was that another of your dreams, Maida?" Rosie asked mischievously. "Dreams?" Maida repeated, firing up. But before she could say anything that she would regret, the dimples came. "Perhaps it was a dream," she said prettily. "But if it was, then everything's a dream." "I believe every word that Maida says," Dicky protested stoutly. "I believe that Maida believes it," Arthur said with a smile. They all stopped with Rosie while she bought the black velvet ribbon and strung the heart on it. She packed it neatly away in the glossy box in which the jeweler had done it up. "If my mama doesn't come back to wear that heart, nobody else ever will," she said passionately. "Never, never, never, unless I have a little girl of my own someday." "Your mother will come back," Maida said. Chapter 14. Christmas Happenings. Maida was awakened early Christmas morning by a long, wild peal of the bell. Before she could collect her scattered wits, she heard Rosie's voice. "Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas! Oh, Granny, won't you please let me run upstairs and wake Maida? I've got something dreadfully important to tell her." Maida heard Granny's bewildered, "All right, child," heard Rosie rush through the living room, and then she bounded out of bed, prickling all over with excitement. "Maida!" Rosie called from the stairs. "Wake up! I've something wonderful to tell you." But Maida had guessed it. "I know!" she cried, as Rosie burst into the room. "Your mother's come home! My mother's come home!" Rosie echoed. The two little girls seized each other and hopped around the room in a mad dance. Maida chanting in a deep sing-song, "Your mother's come home! Your mother's come home! Your mother's come home!" And Rosie screaming at the top of her lungs, "My mother's come home!" After a few moments of this, they sank exhausted onto the bed. "Tell me all about it," Maida gasped. "Begin at the very beginning and don't leave anything out." "Well then," Rosie began, "I will. When I went to bed last night after leaving you, I got to thinking of my mother, and pretty soon I was so sad that I nearly cried my eyes out. Well, after a long while, I got to sleep, and I guess I must have been very tired, for I didn't wake up the way I generally do of my own accord. Aunt Teresa had to wake me. She put on my best dress and did my hair this new way, and even let me put cologne on. I couldn't think why, because I never dress up until the afternoon. Once, when I looked at her, I saw there were tears in her eyes, and oh, Maida, it made me feel something awful, for I thought she was to tell me that my mother was dead. When I came downstairs, my father hugged me and kissed me and sat with me while I ate my breakfast. Oh, I was so afraid he was going to tell me that Mother was dead, but he didn't. After a while, he said, "Your Christmas presents are all up in your mother's bedroom, Rosie." So I skipped up there. My father and Aunt Teresa didn't come with me, but I noticed they stood downstairs and listened. I opened the door. Rosie stopped for breath. "Go on," Maida entreated. "Oh, do hurry." "Well, there, lying on the bed was my mother, Maida. I felt so queer that I couldn't move. My feet wouldn't walk, just like in a dream. My mother said, "Come here, my precious little girl." But it sounded as if it came from way, way far off. And then, Maida, I could move. I ran across the room and hugged her and kissed her until I couldn't breathe. Then she said, "I have a beautiful Christmas gift for you, little daughter." And she pulled something over toward me that lay all wrapped up in a shawl on the bed. What do you think it was? "I don't know. Oh, tell me, Rosie." "Guess," Rosie insisted, her eyes dancing. "Rosie, if you don't tell me this minute, I'll pinch you." "It was a baby, a little baby brother." "A baby! Oh, Rosie!" The two little girls hopped about the room in another mad dance. "Maida, he's the darlingest baby that ever was in the whole wide world. His name is Edward. He's only 6 weeks old, and he can smile." "Smile, Rosie?" "He can. I saw him. And sneeze." "Sneeze, Rosie?" "That's not all," said Rosie proudly. "He can wink his eyes and double up his fists and a whole lot of things. There's no doubt that he's a remarkable baby. My mother says so, and pretty as, oh, he's prettier than any puppy I ever saw. He's a little too pink in the face, and he hasn't much hair yet. There's a funny spot in the top of his head that goes up and down all the time that you have to be dreadfully careful about. But he certainly is the loveliest baby I ever saw. What do you think my mother let me do?" "Oh, what?" "She let me rock him for a moment, and I asked her if you could rock him someday, and she said you could." "Oh, oh!" "And what else do you think she's going to let me do?" "I can't guess. Oh, tell me quick, Rosie." "She says she's going to let me give him his bath Saturdays and Sundays and wheel him out every day in his carriage." "Rosie," Maida said impressively, "you ought to be the happiest little girl in the world. Think of having a baby brother for a Christmas present. You will let me wheel him sometimes, won't you?" "Of course I will. I shall divide him exactly in half with you." "Where has your mother been all this time?" Maida asked. "Oh, she's been dreadfully sick in a hospital. She was sick after the baby came to her, so sick that she couldn't even take care of him. She said they were afraid she was going to die. But she's all right now. Father bought her for Christmas a beautiful long red silk dress that's just to lie down in. She looks like a queen in it. And yet she looks like a little girl too, for her hair is done in 2 braids. Her hair comes way down below her waist, like your mother's hair. And when I gave her the little silver heart, she was so pleased with it, she put it right on, and it looked sweet. She said she would much rather wear it on a black velvet ribbon than on a silver chain." "Everything's come out all right, hasn't it?" Maida said with ecstasy. "I guess it has. Now I must go. I want to be sure to be there when the baby wakes up. I asked my mother when you could see the baby, Maida, and she said tomorrow. I can't wait to show you his feet. You never did see such little toes in your life." Exciting as this event was, it was nothing to what followed. Granny and Maida were still talking about Rosie's happiness when Billy Potter suddenly came marching through the shop and into the living room. "Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas!" they all said at once. "Granny," Billy asked immediately, "if you could have your choice of all the Christmas gifts in the world, which one would you choose?" An expression of bewilderment came into Granny's bright blue eyes. "A Christmas gift, Mr. Billy?" she said in an uncertain tone. "I couldn't think of anything as long as I can't have my little Annie with me." Maida saw Billy's eyes snap and sparkle at the word Annie. She wondered, could it be possible? She began to tremble. "And so you'd choose your daughter, Granny?" Billy questioned. "Choose my daughter? Of course I would." Granny stopped to stare in astonishment at Billy. "Oh, Mr. Billy, if you could only find her." She gazed imploringly at him. Billy continued to smile at her, his eyes all scrinkled up. Granny jumped to her feet. She seized Billy's arms. "Oh, Mr. Billy, you have found her," she quavered. Billy nodded. "I've found her, Granny. I told you I would, and I have. Now don't get excited. She's all right, and you're all right, and everything's all right. She'll be here as soon as you're ready to see her." For a moment, Maida was afraid Granny was going to faint, for she dropped back into her chair, and her eyes filled with tears. But at Billy's last words, the old fire came back to her eyes, the color to her cheeks. "I want to see her at once," she said with spirit. "Listen," Billy said. "Last night I happened to fall into conversation with a young Irishman who had come to read the gas meter in my house. I asked him where he came from. He said, 'Aldegarry, County Sligo.' I asked him if he knew Annie Flynn. 'Sure, and didn't she marry my cousin? She lives—' Well, the short of it is that I went right over to see her, though it was late then. I found her a widow with 2 children. She nearly went crazy at the prospect of seeing her mother again, but we agreed that we must wait until morning. We planned—" "Oh, come in, Annie," he called suddenly. At his call, the shop door opened and shut. There was a rush of 2 pairs of feet through the shop. In the doorway appeared a young woman carrying a baby. Beside her came a little boy on crutches. Granny stood like a marble statue staring, but Maida screamed. Who do you suppose they were? They were Mrs. Dorr and Delia and Dicky. "Oh, my mother," Mrs. Dorr said. "My little Annie, my little girl," Granny murmured. The tears began to stream down her cheeks. Followed kissings and huggings by the dozen. Followed questions and answers by the score. "And to think you've been living so close to us all this time," Granny said after the excitement had died down. She was sitting on the couch now with Delia asleep in her lap, Mrs. Dorr on one side and Dicky on the other. "And sure me own heart was telling me the truth all the time. Did I but listen to it, for it was loving this fine little lad every minute of the day." She patted Dicky's head. "And me never seeing the baby that has me own name." She cuddled Delia close. "I'm the happiest woman in the whole world this day." It was arranged that the 2 families were to have Christmas dinner together. Dicky and Mrs. Dorr hurried back for a few moments to bring their turkey to the feast. "Granny, will you love me just the same now that you've got Dicky and Delia?" Maida said wistfully. "Love you, my lamb? Sure, I'll love you all the more, for 'twas through you I met Mr. Billy, and through Mr. Billy I found me Annie. Oh, Mr. Billy, 'tis the grand man you make for such a boy that you are." "Yes'm," said Billy. When Mrs. Dorr returned, mother and daughter went to work on the dinner, while Billy and Maida and Dicky trimmed the tree. When the door opened, they caught bits of conversation, Granny's brogue growing thicker and thicker in her excitement, and Mrs. Dorr relapsing under its influence into old country speech. At such times, Maida noticed that Billy's eyes always scrinkled up. They were just putting the finishing touches to the tree when the window darkened suddenly. Maida looked up in surprise, and then, "Oh, my papa's come!" she screamed. "My papa's come to my Christmas tree after all!" There is so much to tell about the Christmas tree that I don't know where to begin. First of all came Laura and Harold. Mrs. Lathrop stopped with them for a moment to congratulate Mrs. Dorr on finding her mother. "Mrs. Lathrop, permit me to introduce my father, Mr. Westerbrook," Maida said. Mrs. Lathrop was very gracious. "The neighborhood have accepted your daughter as Mrs. Flynn's grandchild, Mr. Westerbrook, but I guessed the truth from the first. I believed, however, that you wished the matter kept a secret, and I have said nothing of it to anybody." "I thank you, madam," said Buffalo Westerbrook, bending on her one of his piercing scrutinies. "However the neighborhood accepted her, they have given her back her health. I can never be too grateful to them." Came Rosie next with a, "Oh, Maida, if you could only have seen Edward tonight when my mother bathed him." Came Arthur, came the Doyles, came the Clark twins with Betsy tagging at their heels. Last of all, to Maida's great delight, came Dr. Pierce. Nobody was allowed to go into the shop where the tree stood until the last guest had arrived. But in spite of their impatience, they had a gay half-hour of waiting. Billy amused them with all kinds of games and tricks and jokes, and when he tired, Dr. Pierce, who soon became a great favorite, took them in hand. Dr. Pierce sat most of the evening, holding Betsy in his lap, listening to her funny baby chatter and roaring at her escapades. He took a great fancy to the Clark twins, and made all manner of fun for the children by pretending that there was only one of them. "Goodness, how you do fly about," he would say ruefully to Dorothy. "An instant ago you were standing close beside me," or, "How can you be here on the couch," he would say to Mabel, "when there you are as plain as a pikestaff standing over in that corner?" "What can you do about that leg, Eli?" Mr. Westerbrook asked Dr. Pierce once when Dicky swung across the room. "I've been thinking about that," Dr. Pierce answered briskly. "I guess Granny and Annie will have to let me take Dicky for a while. A few months in my hospital and he'll be jumping around here like a frog with the toothache." "Oh, Dr. Pierce, do you think you can cure him?" Mrs. Dorr asked, clasping her hands. "Cure him?" Dr. Pierce answered with his jolliest laugh. "Of course we can. He's not in half so bad a condition as Maida was when we straightened her out. Grindschmidt taught us a whole bag of tricks. Dicky could almost mend himself if only he'd stay still long enough. Look at Maida. Would you ever think she'd been much worse than Dicky?" Everybody stared hard at Maida, seated on her father's knee, and she dimpled and blushed under the observation. She was dressed all in white. White ribbons, white sash, white socks, and white slippers. The softest, filmiest white cobweb dress. Her hair streamed loose, a cascade of delicate, clinging ringlets of the palest gold. Her big gray eyes, soft with the happiness of the long day, reflected the firelight. Her cheeks had grown round, as well as pink and dimpled. She did not look sick. "Oh, Dicky," she cried, "just think, you're going to be cured. Didn't I tell you when my father saw you he'd fix it all right? My father's a magician." But Dicky could not answer. He was gulping furiously to keep back the tears of delight. But he smiled his radiant smile. Billy took everybody's attention away from him by turning an unexpected cartwheel in the middle of the floor. Finally, Maida announced that it was time for the tree. They formed in line and marched into the shop to a tune that Billy thumped out of the silver-toned old spinet. I wish you could have heard the things the children said. The tree went close to the ceiling. Just above it, with arms outstretched, swung a beautiful Christmas angel. Hanging from it were all kinds of glittery, quivery, sparkly things in silver and gold. Festooned about it were strings of popcorn and cranberries. At every branch tip glistened a long glass icicle, and the whole thing was ablaze with candles and veiled in a mist of gold and silver. At the foot of the tree, groups of tiny figures in painted plaster told the whole Christmas Day story from the moment of the first sight of the star by the shepherds who watched their flocks, to the arrival at the manger of the wise men, bearing gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Billy Potter disappeared for a moment, and came in presently the most chubby and pink-faced and blue-eyed of Santa Clauses, in purple velvet trimmed with ermine, with long white hair and a long white beard. I can't begin to name to you all the fruits of that magic tree. From Maida there came to Rosie a big golden cage with a pair of canary birds. To Arthur, a chest of wonderful tools. To Dicky, a little bookcase full of beautiful books. To Lara, a collection of sashes and ribbons. To Harold, a long train of cars. From Molly and Betsy and the Clark twins came so many gifts that you could hardly count them all. Dolls and dolls' wardrobes, tiny doll houses and tinier doll furniture. For Tim came a sled and a bicycle. To Maida came a wonderful set of paper boxes from Dicky, a long necklace of carved beads from Arthur, a beautiful blank book with all her candy recipes beautifully written out from Rosie, a warm little pair of knitted bed shoes from Granny, a quaint, old-fashioned locket from Dr. Pierce. He said it had once belonged to another little girl who had died. From Billy came a book. Perhaps you can fancy how Maida jumped when she read The Crystal Ball by William Potter on the cover. But I do not think you can imagine how pleased she looked when inside she read the printed dedication to Petronilla. From her father came a beautiful miniature of her mother, painted on ivory. The children crowded about her to see the beautiful face of which Maida had told them so much. There was the mass of golden hair, which she had described so proudly. There, too, was a heart-shaped pendant of diamonds, suspended from a black velvet ribbon tied close to the white throat. The children looked at the picture, then they looked at each other. But Maida did not notice. She was watching eagerly while Dr. Pierce and Billy and her father opened her gifts to them. She was afraid they would not understand. "They're to save time, you see, when you want to shave in a hurry," she explained. "Maida," her father said gravely, "that is a very thoughtful gift. It's strange when you come to think of it, as busy a man as I am, and with all the friends I have, nobody has ever thought to give me a safety razor." "I don't know how I ever managed to get along without one," Dr. Pierce declared, his curls bobbing. "As for me, I shall probably save about a third of my income in the future," Billy announced. All three were so pleased that they laughed for a long time. I'm going to give you another Christmas present, Maida, Mr. Westerbrook said suddenly. I'm going to give us both one. A vacation. We're going to start for Europe, week after next. Oh, Papa, how lovely, Maida said. Shall we see Venice again? But how can I give up my little shop and my friends? Maida going away? The children exclaimed. Oh, dear, oh, dear. But Mr. Westerbrook, isn't Maida coming back again? Rosie asked. How I shall miss her, Lara chimed in. Take my lamb away? Granny wailed. Sure she'll be sick in those wild countries. You'll have to take me with you, Mr. Westerbrook, only... She did not finish her sentence, but her eyes went anxiously to her daughter's face. No, Granny, you're not to go, Mr. Westerbrook said decisively. You're to stay right here with your daughter and her children. You're all to run the shop and live over it. Maida's old enough and well enough to take care of herself now. And I think she'd better begin to take care of me as well. Don't you think so, Maida? Of course I do, Papa. If you need me, I want to. Mr. Westerbrook, Molly broke into the conversation determinedly, did you ever give Maida a pair of Shetland ponies? Mr. Westerbrook bent on the robin, in the most amused of his smiles. Yes, he said. And an automobile? Tim asked. Mr. Westerbrook turned to the bogle. Yes, he said, a little puzzled. And did Maida's mother have a gold brush with her initials and diamonds on it? Rosie asked. Mr. Westerbrook roared. Yes. And have you got 12 peacocks, 2 of them white? Arthur asked. Yes. And has Maida a little theater of her own and a dollhouse as big as a cottage? Lara asked. Yes. And did she have a May party last year that she invited over 400 children to? Harold asked. Yes. And did you once give her weight in silver dollars? Mabel asked. Yes. And a family of 20 dolls? Dorothy asked. Yes. You shall see all these things when we come back, Mr. Westerbrook promised. Then why did she run away? Betsy asked solemnly. Everybody laughed. I always said that Maida was a princess in disguise, Dicky maintained. And now I suppose she's going back to be a princess again. Dicky was the first friend I made, Papa, Maida said, smiling at her first friend. But you'll come back sometime, won't you, Maida? Dicky begged. Yes, Dicky, Maida answered. I'll come back. Yes. Maida did come back. And what fun they all have. The little 6 in their private quarters, and the big 6 with their picnics, and their adventures with the gypsies, as told in Maida's little house. But now, Maida's little shop has come to the end. This is your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. We've just reached the end of an entire book. Join us next for a refreshing poetic interlude. You can find a link to our podcast on the Marshall Public Library webpage, www.marshallpl.org. I'll talk to you again soon.